Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in just one moment. Thank you all for coming. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know others will be joining, but I want to welcome everyone to our webinar. We're really excited to have you. My name is Judy Levin, and I'm with the Center for Environmental Health, and I'll be the moderator for today. We're really pleased to be hosting this webinar with Green Science Policy Institute and Healthcare Without Harm. And we're also excited to be joined by an amazing panel of speakers, which you will get a chance to hear from today. This session is being recorded and it will run for about 75 minutes. You'll receive the recording and the slides and a resource sheet within the next few days. We'll take questions at the end, but please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box as you think of them, and then we'll answer them at the end. Okay, let's get started. We're going to launch a poll very quickly just to start things off. So, Elaine, if you could launch our poll, please. So there are 3 questions. What is the most common ignition source for furniture fires? And you'll see your choices, and you have an option of don't know if you just don't know, and that's okay. We don't expect you to. California Technical Bulletin 117/2013 provides the use of flame retardant chemicals in upholstered furniture products. Yes or no, or I don't know. And then there's a third, question 2. So please answer those 3, and we're not going to give you the answers right now, but we're going to go back at the end. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Okay, I think let's see, numbers are still moving, but I think we should go ahead and we'll close the poll. No, I'm going to give it one more minute. I apologize. Things are moving too rapidly, and it's such good information to know where people are starting at. And hopefully by the end, you're going to feel totally confident about all these questions. Okay, now we will close the poll. Thanks. And we won't share the poll quite yet. So, let's see. I am going to kick this off. There we go. I just want to share today's speakers, and you'll be hearing from each of them. I'll introduce them as they come up. Okay, so let's get started. Again, my name is Judy Levin. I am with the Center for Environmental Health, and I lead our work on healthier furniture. And I have the great pleasure of helping designers and purchasers from government, higher education, and private business to select healthier furniture. So I will try to give you in 10 minutes about an overview of more than the 40-year journey flammability regulations have taken. It's just a quick overview, and others will go into more depth. We hope that you will come away with an understanding of where these regulations currently stand and why we're even talking about regulations when we talk about healthier furniture. So as many of you know, historically there have been 2 furniture flammability regulations established by California that have guided how furniture has been made virtually throughout the whole United States. The first on the left, California Technical Bulletin 117, was signed into law in 1975 and addressed the flammability requirements for like office furniture and residential furniture. And this was the primary standard that most furniture has to meet. On the right is Technical Bulletin 133. This is a special occupancy standard for public buildings like dormitories, healthcare facilities, large auditoriums, etc. And that's a very small amount of furniture. That has been a small amount of furniture, and that was passed in 1991. I want to say right from the stop, right from the start, hopefully you'll understand, like, so why are we talking about these standards? Why does it even matter? And what does it have to do with our ability to buy healthier furniture? So it's really important to know that furniture flammability standards are tests, they're performance tests. They don't tell you how to meet the test, you just need to meet the test. So they can be met oftentimes, with flame retardants or without flame retardants. Because flame retardants are the cheapest way to meet these an open flame standards, they are typically used, but they're not needed for a smolder test. Excuse me. So again, standards don't dictate how to meet the requirements. So, excuse me, there's two tests, and bear with me because you're going to hear a lot of us talk about open flame versus smolder. And I just want to take hopefully a brief moment to explain it so you'll understand that. A small open flame test like TB117 was required that a bare piece of foam withstand a small open flame for about 12 seconds. And the cheapest and easiest way to meet the standard was through the use of flame retardant chemicals, although it was found that because it was a bare piece of foam, which is not really how fires occur, that by the time a fire burnt through the fabric in a real fire, any flame retardants that were in there were simply overwhelmed and could not stop the spread of fire. So they were just ineffective. The second test is a smolder test, and that's a test in which the various components of the furniture are tested in an assembly with a smoldering cigarette. So bare foam alone is not tested. So this is more reflective of how real furniture is. We all sit on furniture foam covered by fabric, and it also is the most common source of fire, smoldering sources. So this standard is typically met by using a smolder resistant fabric, and that protects against the ignition of the underlying foam. So why do we care about these standards? Because basically, quite simply, whatever standard is in place dictates the use of flame retardant chemicals in effect. And flame retardants don't stay in the products. They migrate out of the products for the lifetime of that product, and they get into our household dust. And then we ingest the dust when we put our hands to our mouth. It also gets in our pets, and they're also released into the wider environment. So you will see flame retardant chemicals in the Arctic, 1 mile under the ocean, virtually everywhere in our water, our sediment, our wildlife. So this is a very important topic. And some of these chemicals have been associated with very serious health effects, like reduced IQ in children, attention deficit disorder, reproductive problems, cancer, and thyroid disruption, and many others. So fast forward, we've gone 30 years to June of 2012, when the weight of the evidence had tipped enough, prompted by years of advocacy by many of those people on the phone and in our audience, scientists, NGOs, health experts, firefighters, and also by the Chicago Tribune series that really exposed the deceitful tactics used by the chemical industry and big tobacco combined to turn attention away from cigarettes that were lighting the fires, and instead creating a narrative about how furniture was just too flammable. So in June of 2012, Governor Brown announced that he wanted to change TB117 so that it would reduce the use of chemical flame retardants while still continuing to ensure fire safety. So just as a repeated point, you can see TB117 2013 was adopted in 2015, but it actually can be met with the use of flame retardants or without, although virtually all furniture meets it without the use of flame retardant chemicals currently. I'm very proud of that label, which CEH, the firefighters, California Professional Firefighters, and NRDC helped to develop to help consumers know whether the product they have does or does not contain flame retardant chemicals. After this webinar, look under your chair and see if you see it. Fast forwarding again, in 2019, the California Bureau decided to remove the requirements for technical bulletin 133, that special occupancy test, and they just didn't feel it was needed at this time. And excuse me, I'm checking my notes right here. And I want to say this was a policy win because it really sent out the message that we did not feel we needed an open flame test. But in every state that we've looked at, fire codes for special occupancy buildings that are unsprinklered, meaning they don't have automatic fire sprinklers, often need to meet ASTM E1537. So hospitals that are unsprinklered, for example, will still need to meet ASTM 1537, which is basically a sister to TB 133, very similar. So it's a policy win, but those unsprinklered buildings will still need to use flame retardant chemicals to meet it until we come up with a better way. And then finally, springing all the way till today in January of 2021, I don't know if many people realize this because it was announced in the Federal Register, but the nation adopted TB 117-2013 as the national standard. So that's very exciting, but still it is just a performance test. It is a smoldering test, which is what TB 117-2013 is, but it still can be met with or without the use of flame retardant chemicals. So if you are a specifier of furniture, you do need to require and put in your specification that products not only need to meet the national standard, but they must be met without the use of flame retardant chemicals. So you would think after all these years, we finally put this to rest. However, because we've adopted a national standard, the standard addresses the major causes of fires that can be met without the use of flame retardants. And when we take out flame retardants from these products, our body burdens actually go down, and California has repealed TB 133. So why are efforts still underway to bring back an open flame test? And that's one of the discussion items we'll get to. So that's my contact information. And now I would like to introduce Tonya Corcoran. Tonya is the Assistant Director and the Deputy Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Household Goods and Services. She was a former California Bureau Chief who oversaw the development of TB 117-2013, and she's recently returned to the Bureau at the request of the Governor. So thank you so much, Tonya, for being on.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. I was appointed back in April of 2012 by Governor Brown, about 8 weeks before he announced that the Bureau must look at the standard and look at making it to reduce reliance on flame retardant chemicals. Next slide. So today, next slide, please.
Apologies.
Okay.
Is that not forwarding?
I can't do it.
No, you can't. It's on me. I'm pressing double and everything. There we go.
Okay, great. All right, so today the topics that we'll discuss, I'll provide a brief background on the Bureau. We'll provide an overview of the regulatory rulemaking process and findings for TB 117-2013, discuss the barrier study and cost benefit analysis that was associated with the study, cover Assembly Bill 2998, which limits flame retardants in furniture here in California, and the combined labeling requirement for TB 117-2013. Next slide. So specific to the background. Next slide. So the Bureau communicates flammability standards in the form of technical bulletins. These are performance standards, and we do not prescribe nor prohibit use of any specific material or manufacturing methods. The Bureau was established back in 1911, and that was to deal with flammability in mattresses. But in 1972, we were required to establish upholstered furniture flammability standards. That was done in 1975 with TB 117. But again, in June, we were directed, June of 2012, directed to review the 40-year-old standard and look at reducing toxic flame retardants and ensure fire safety. Next slide. So I wanted to touch briefly on the regulatory rulemaking process. Judy provided you the background of the standard, but in California, it's an exhaustive and deliberative process. And it took about 18 months to complete, and 18 months really working on it every day, all day long. So these are the steps that are laid out in what a regulatory rulemaking package must contain, our initial and final statements of reason. The initial is what's the problem, what's the solution, and all the regulatory language that must be specified in that. For public comment, you're required to hold one public comment hearing as part of the regulatory rulemaking process. But in this case, we held workshops, we held several stakeholders meetings, public hearings. In addition to that, I met with representatives of other state agencies. That was the California Department of Public Health, the Attorney General's office, state fire marshals. So it was a really comprehensive reaching out to make sure that we got comment from everybody that was interested in this. It requires that you have studies and data relied upon. There were 11 studies referenced and relied upon in this regulatory rulemaking. We did conduct a cost-benefit analysis, which is also required. So we have to weigh the economic impact to industry, but also what the cost is to consumers as well. A precision and bias study was conducted to demonstrate the repeatability and reproducibility of the test standard. 9 labs participated. There were 8 types of cover fabrics, 2 types of barriers, and 1 filling material. It was found to be validated. And the last component is looking at the CEQA evaluation, which is the environmental impacts. So California law requires that public agencies evaluate and disclose the environmental impacts and to limit or avoid those impacts to the extent possible. There was a negative declaration. They found that this was actually a benefit to that. So what made up the regulatory rulemaking process, there was 11 binders. There were about 3 to 4 inch binders that made up the entire record. We have that here at the Bureau, if anybody was ever interested in going through that and looking at it. The Bureau was sued in 2014 right around implementation, but we did prevail in that lawsuit. Next slide. Just a couple of findings I thought you would find interesting is TB 117 did not address the cover fabric or the interactions of the filling materials. So that's where TB 117 was lacking. We found that flame retardant foam can actually increase smolder propensity. CPSC and Bureau staff, the engineers here, concluded that the upholstery cover fabric plays a more important role in fire behavior performance than in the filling materials. There were several benefits that, over the years that there were that were put into place, and we think that contributed to a reduction in fire deaths. Those are listed in blue on the screen. And one of the outcomes that we had is that we did agree to conduct a barrier study, to do a 2-year barrier study to look at an open flame standard. Next slide. So that barrier study was done in 2016 and completed in 2018. The standard was a bench scale open flame barrier test. It was found to be an effective test method, but as I discussed earlier, we have to look at everything. It's the standard, but what's the cost benefit? What's the net gain that we're going to get from that? So all of that barrier study and the cost benefit analysis, there's a link at the bottom there where you can find that information. But I wanted to move just to the California State University cost benefit analysis piece of that. And that is, they concluded and summarized in both the report and their PowerPoint presentation, it did not support the adoption of the Bureau proposed fire barrier standard. So it was not adopted here in California. Next slide. This is a chart from the cost benefit analysis CSU conducted. And the low number of injuries and fatalities did not support adding the open flame test. That full analysis can be found again at that link below. Next slide. Okay, so moving to Assembly Bill 2998, that went into effect. It was passed in 2018, but it was effective January 1, 2020. And it prohibits flame retardant chemicals at levels above 1,000 parts per million in California for our covered products, juvenile products, upholstered furniture, and foam in mattresses. So we do have a frequently asked questions specific to this. That link is also provided for you to review if interested. And then last, I wanted to cover, next slide, please, is the TB 117 2013 combined label. So the Bureau in California here has no authority over the federal label, but we have worked with CPSC and determined and approve the combined label. So you'll see that there's a separate label and a combined label on your screen. If you are selling in California, it must have both the federal and California label until either the Bureau modifies our regulation or there's a statutory change to change that. So for California, that still needs to be provided. As Judy had mentioned, the federal standard went into effect June 25th, 2021, but labeling is required for furniture manufactured on or after June 25th, 2022. So that concludes my presentation. Just real quick, Sue, her contact information is at the bottom of that, and she is our flammability engineer and can answer questions specific to TB 117, the standard and labeling requirements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tonya, and thank you so much for all the work that you did to make this happen. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Lydia Jahl. Lydia is a PhD scientist at the, a PhD chemist and a Science and Policy Fellow at the Green Science Policy Institute. She works with government, industry, and other NGOs to make science-based decisions to reduce unnecessary use of toxic flame retardant chemicals or toxic chemicals in consumer products. Thank you so much, Lydia.
Thanks, Judy. So today, if you could go to the next slide, I'll be addressing the question of if deaths have been increasing or decreasing in the United States. So unfortunately, industries who profit from the use of flame retardants or increased fire testing take advantage of our fear of fires and present misleading statistics and make false claims about fire due to furnitures. So I'll be addressing that today. Next slide. So people who support flame retardants for their own profitability claim that fire deaths have been increasing in California since California updated the furniture flammability standard in 2014. But what these people do not tell you is that the increases in fire fatalities are due to wildfires, not fires associated with upholstered furniture. So this graph shows fire fatalities in California over the past decade or so. If you look in red, that shows all causes of fire fatalities. And you can say that it has increased in the past few years, but this is due to the yellow line, which is wildfires, which have been plaguing California in recent years. In blue, you can see fires associated with upholstered furniture, and those have remained steady and at low numbers for more than 10 years. So this increase is not due to upholstered furniture, which is really important for everyone's understanding. Additionally, the US Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, has reported a decrease in fires, including those associated with upholstered furniture in recent years across the whole United States. Next slide. So to look in this a bit more, since 1980, there's been a decrease of over 50% in home fire deaths across the United States, which is excellent news. There's also been a very small number, less than 10 fire deaths per year in educational, healthcare, and detention facilities. So this really isn't a huge concern for those of you working in special occupancy. But to help better understand where these fires are actually occurring and why they start, most fires actually start in kitchens and cooking areas, as you might expect from the open flames there. And for fires that are associated with upholstered furniture, those are still largely due to smoking materials. So while there has been a decrease in smoking, especially in the United States in recent years, they're still an important contributor to fires. And as Judy talked about previously, there's preventative measures that are really important. So sprinklers greatly improve fire safety by stopping the spread of fires before it gets too bad. And smoke alarms are also really important. So statistics have shown that nearly 3 out of every 5 home fire deaths were at homes where the smoke alarms were either missing or malfunctioning. So this is super important to realize that in our buildings, we can make them a lot safer with the new smolder standard, but also with things like sprinklers and smoke alarms. Next slide. Another claim that people will make is that newer flame retardants are safer. So they'll say that old harmful flame retardants like PBDEs are not in use anymore, and the newer flame retardants they suggest and produce are safe, but this is also not true. Similar halogenated flame retardants are still in use and have similar health harm. And additionally, newer replacements like organophosphate ester flame retardants have similar health harms, and they're being found at increasing concentrations both in dust and in people and animals. So what we'd really like to emphasize is that flame retardants need to be proven safe and effective against fires before they are used, which has not been the standard in this country. And additionally, adding flame retardants removes products from the circular economy. So as we're all trying to work towards greater sustainability to decrease climate change, flame retardants can work against that goal. Next slide, please. So in addition to claiming the safety of new flame retardants, flame retardant manufacturers and also the testing labs that profit off of additional flammability testing will claim that it is safe to meet, it is safest to meet both an open flame standard and a smolder standard. So first of all, this is just unnecessary. As Tonya just explained, the smolder standard is extremely effective against preventing the major causes of furniture fires. So what flame retardant industries will claim is that furniture barriers can be effective, but you don't need to use toxic flame retardants to meet that standard. But in reality, and as the cost benefit analysis showed that Tonya presented, flame retardants are a much less expensive way to meet open flame standards because the barriers are so difficult and costly to make. And this is what we saw in California when we had the open flame standard TB 117. Flame retardants were not required, yet they were largely the only way that this standard was met because of the increased cost of barriers. In addition, with these barriers, they're so expensive that only the very affluent can afford them. So this creates an environmental justice problem as well. Next slide, please. So lastly, I'd just like to give a quick reminder on the impacts of flame retardants in furniture. So first of all, there's no overall fire safety benefit of adding flame retardants. The smolder standard can be easily met without flame retardants, and they prevent upholstered furniture fires. Also, flame retardants migrate out of the furniture. So when you just have the furniture in your room, the flame retardants will slowly be released over time. And also when you sit down on the furniture and you feel that poof of air come out of the foam, flame retardants are also released. Studies have shown that people in areas with strict open flame standards, such as the UK, have higher blood levels of toxic flame retardants, and children also have higher levels in their bodies because of their increased hand-to-mouth behavior. So once flame retardants are added into furniture, it's inevitable that people will be exposed to them, and this exposure is associated with cancer and neurological, reproductive, immune, and developmental problems. So for all these reasons, the smolder standard is effective because it can decrease furniture fires, but without the additional health harm. So for this reason, we're really excited that the new nationally adopted standard is a smolder standard. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lydia. I really appreciate your presentation. I'd like to introduce Jay Fleming, who will be our next speaker. Jay has over 43 years of experience as a firefighter, and he also serves as an expert witness. Jay currently serves as Deputy Chief for the Boston Fire Department and previously was a fire marshal for the Boston Fire Department. Thank you so much, Jay, for joining us.
Oh, thank you for that introduction. With one exception, I should have updated my resume. I just recently retired.
Okay, there we go.
That's okay. But more importantly, I actually got on 1978. So I actually remember what it was like before a lot of the furniture still hadn't met any of these standards. So it was interesting at the time. Next slide, please. America Burning, that's available online. You can look it up. America was burning at the time, particularly the urban areas. And so Congress, there was a presidential commission And they wrote a great report, which you can download. But in 1972, it was published in 1975, but the hearings took place in 72. They talked about the hazard of flames and the new materials, basically plastics and synthetic material. But they actually said that it might make fires worse. And they expressed caution about using flame retardants to solve that problem. Then how did we end up with flame retardants in our furniture? Next slide, please. This was an article in Fire Journal, which is the National Fire Protection Association's main magazine that they send out to all their members. And I assume you all know what the NFPA is. They said there's two strategies for reducing the nation's fire losses. This was touched upon earlier. We could have a mandatory standard for upholstered furniture or increase smoke detectors, and they recommended that we use smoke detectors as the more viable option. It was less expensive and they weren't worried about the increase in smoke. So this problem, and I'm not going to get into the health risks, although they're serious. I'm going to try to look at it. Have they improved fire safety in the United States? And even back in the 70s, there was some doubts that that might accomplish it. Next slide, please. So this was a New Zealand report in 2019. Now, when I show you the data from this, I want to make it clear that they were doing a computer model of a fire in a building, but I want to get into the results because typically when the industry talks about flame retardants being effective, they will mention that it reduces the time to, it increases the time to flashover, which is when people die. That's not true. Or it decreases the heat release rate, which is the reason why the time to flashover is extended. But this study said they didn't recommend, as was discussed earlier, and I just wanted to say this, it's not just the people in this seminar who believe this. This was a New Zealand report, said it's not worth spending all this money to solve a problem, flaming fires in furniture that's really, really small. Next slide, please. So this is what the industry will talk about. And this was the simulation of when you burn furniture with no flame retardants, it reaches, the heat release rate grows faster. And then with the flame retardants, it might occur, in this case, about 5 or 6 minutes later. That's a good thing, I suppose. But if you notice, once the fire starts, the curves are very similar. And so it doesn't, if you're sleeping at night, and I'm talking about residential fires now, all the flame retardants have accomplished is that the clock starts at, say, 12:06 instead of 12 o'clock. But if the smoke detector doesn't go off until that's when you wake up, then it doesn't really matter if you delay the start of the clock on the fires, if you're just going to wake up later. So it is possible that flame retardants delay flashover, but in the same cases where they delay flashover, they may not improve your chances of escaping a fire, because the key time in a residential fire or any fire is not when you die, it's when you stop moving, when you get trapped. And that's typically due to the smoke, not the point when a flashover occurs. Next slide, please. So these same researchers did that analysis. You can do this using computer models. They said, let's find out when the smoke detector goes off, when the visibility would stop people from moving. There's estimates of when that occurs, a visibility of, say, 2 meters, visibility of 2 meters. I think it should be more, but the point is they listed the times when these occurred. So even though the furniture without the flame retardants did flash over later, if you notice though, the smoke alarm activation was at 20 seconds and the time you got trapped was 35. So there was 15 seconds to get out of the room. With the flame retardants, there was 12 seconds to get out of the room. So even though the heat release rate is reduced, if you start the clock when the smoke detector goes off, they didn't help at all. And so when someone tells you flame retardants reduce fire risk or they extend flashover, the time to flashover, realize they're not measuring what really matters. And when we had our fights, the International Association of Firefighters was fighting with the NFPA on the new flaming standard. We kept pushing for them to measure the rate of smoke production, and they refused. Eventually that standard was dropped. But it's amazing to me that even though smoke is the key factor in almost every fire, that is the one thing, the rate of smoke production, that they never measure. So it just goes to show you the way the industry can influence the testing standards. Next slide, please. And so if you look down here, how many lives are saved? So it says if you had furniture regulations, it might save 7, smoke alarm regulations, it might save 9, both might save 14, but the vast majority of the lives that can be saved are with smoke alarms. And something that you probably aren't aware of is that in June of next year, the underwriter laboratory standards for smoke alarms, for the first time, will actually have to pass a synthetic smoldering and synthetic flaming fires. Amazingly enough, they haven't done that since the beginning. And they're going to be resistant to nuisance alarms. So there'll be fewer disablements, superior response to synthetic fires. So not only do smoke detectors make a bigger difference now than flame retardants, they're going to make a much bigger difference in the future. So that we don't know, it not only are flame retardants not necessary now to really make a big impact on fire safety, they're going to be less likely to make an impact once these new smoke alarms get out there into the public. Next slide, please. So here's from March of 2020. This was recently done by a researcher down at the Southwest Research Institute. And look at it again. It's very similar. It is true that the furniture with the flame retardants, and it was UK flame retardants, which are much heavier than UL 217. So with the UK flame retardants, it is delayed. So the time for the fire to actually start growing is delayed. But once it starts, the fire growth is almost identical. So again, if you're waiting for that smoke detector to wake you up, then all you've gained is that the clock starts, say, 6 or 7 minutes later than it normally would have. But if you're not waking up until the smoke detector goes off, it makes no difference. You die at 12:20 instead of 12:15. It doesn't change your chances of dying. And just I circled that. So they all will also will say sometimes like the total smoke produced is reduced with flame retardants, but that fact is irrelevant. Next slide, please. And also just because it might work in some unique situations, like on the space shuttle or the wiring inside walls of a high rise to protect the combustibility of the wires, or possibly airplanes where people are trapped and they can't get out. That doesn't mean that there might be a safety benefit in some circumstances, that it means there's a safety benefit in all circumstances. So when someone tries to pitch this to you, I'm just trying to I want you to understand, listen to what they say and put it in context, and you'll realize that their argument is a lot weaker than it may sound. And I think that's the last slide. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you for all your service as a firefighter, for working so hard. Our next speaker is Steve Kooy. Steve is the Technical Director of Health and Sustainability at BIFMA, which stands for the Business and Institutional Furniture Manufacturers Association. Previously, he worked at a testing organization, a certification agency, and was also the Global Sustainability and Open Innovation Manager for a major furniture manufacturer. So welcome, Steve, and thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you to Green Science Policy and Center Environmental Health for allowing BIFMA to speak. You might be a little surprised that we have a long-standing relationship with those two organizations. We've found a lot of common ground as a manufacturers association, and as mentioned, we represent most of the major commercial office furniture manufacturers in North America and actually throughout the world. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to cover fairly quick, you've heard about this a little bit already, but I think a visual is always nice to see, the difference between open flame and a smolder test. So you can see here, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the right-hand side, the smolder test, but you can understand quite quickly from hopefully this, that, an open flame test is extremely difficult to pass, whether it's the square or more of a Bunsen burner look, like a cone look. There is a direct flame for an extended period of time that essentially makes, or I should say, really doesn't portray what's really going on, as kind of Lydia and Jay already described. We as an industry have been supportive, obviously, of the smolder test for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is, and I think that this sometimes gets glossed over, we of course want to make sure occupants are safe, residents are safe, those types of things. But as an industry, we also represent those who are manufacturing these items or at least handling them on a daily basis. So you wonder kind of how the office furniture industry got so interested in this. Yes, it matters to the outside world, but it actually matters to the employees that are employed in the organization. So that's number one, or at least one of the priorities. The other one is just simply it does the one on the right-hand side, that cigarette test, so to speak, is really mimicking what's going on in the world and kind of supports where Jay was going in terms of what really is the importance of safety, and that's that smoke side and that other side of the fire. So we wanted to put as much as possible a practical sense of where this is going. So that's the TB 117 rule, which we've been fortunate to see go beyond just California. Next slide, please. So one of the other aspects of this, where open flame went before TB 117, and I think it's important to cover this because there are pushes to go back there in the name of safety. And that was to put a barrier down. So what happens in that case is you have a piece of foam and then you put a barrier and then your textile or whatever surface you want to have on there. The barrier often is filled with some pretty tough, harmful chemicals, as mentioned. It does actually reduce performance and comfort, which again, we certainly don't want to, consider that more important than safety. But the reality is, if it's not really actually helping safety, then why are we sacrificing performance and comfort? We certainly have cost, and as mentioned, the fire statistics. We'll go to the next slide, please. So we were fortunate to be part of a group, and it wasn't just the commercial furniture group, but it was also the residential side, the AHFA, and others put together along with Green Science Policy, Center for Environmental Health, and many others to say, hey, let's work as a country on this act. So kind of take what California has done and put it on the national level. So this is the SOFA Act, as we call it, something that was put into place in 2020. I'm bringing this up for a couple reasons. It was mentioned already, but I know we have some furniture manufacturers on the call. Important dates to note, and I guess this really does affect everyone in the country, is that it went into effect already. So the first important date is June 25th, 2021, that you can now use the smolder test as opposed to the open flame test. And, Tonya mentioned this, the compliant label requirement is going to go into effect in 2022. There was an extended period there because it just takes time, believe it or not, to get some of these labels in order beforehand. So we're moving forward for this. And again, our industry considers this important for all the reasons already stated. I mean, obviously toxicity is number one, but then also just some of the other aspects of really having a pragmatic approach to both flammability and the way we build and treat furniture. Next slide, please. And that's one aspect that I think is important to highlight from a practical standpoint. We're seeing more and more legislation around this issue. So that's another area that as manufacturers, we find extremely important is, and this is going to go beyond. I know Judy and I and others could talk about this, Arlene, for hours probably about what's going on in the world of chemistry, chemicals that are now becoming on the radar of various states and hopefully the federal government as well, because toxicity is important. We all know that. PFAS is another one that's coming down the pipe. And what we want to do as a industry trade group, as well as really all of the manufacturers, there could be a number of them on here speaking in place of me, is say we're all supportive of this. First of all, we want to get rid of the toxic materials, as mentioned, for not just the people, the occupants, but also our own employees. The second thing, though, is harmonization. So we're always looking for ways to work together with various people. This is kind of my open invitation. You'll have my contact information. Please reach out to me, because one thing we like to do for somewhat sanity and pragmatism is simply make sure that we're all thinking in the same way, defining toxicity the same, working through how to really implement these things the same, and then of course make sure it's safe for both workers and the people using the product. Next slide, please. So here's an aspect, I mean, this was covered a lot, but I do think it's important that we also did our own research on this as a industry. We certainly look at this from the standpoint of saying, you know, frankly, there's litigious issues that go on. There's also just practical issues. And, you know, California, Michigan, I'm not going to read these, but when we looked at business furniture related fires and the deaths surrounding those, as you can read, there's other reasons for why they happened. Obviously unfortunate still, but the point is it was not about the furniture. It wasn't even frankly about the building materials. It was more of a personal issue that was the cause. As we went through, and this was actually done by the NFPA as well back in 2013, they just could not find anything that was related to the furniture itself. Next slide. So getting to, I always like to kind of leave with a bit of practicality here. One thing that we're hoping that you'll do, especially if you're in the design community, if you're a government specifier, take a look at our level program. We do have a program in place that the furniture industry has put out there, actually with the help of the people at the bottom of the screen there, as well as Judy and others were involved to try to help get an easy button, if you will, to specify furniture. So one of the aspects there is actually a credit specifically for these types of things, toxic flame retardants, PFAS, and low emitting. And that's called credit 7.4.4. If we go to the next slide. So what we're doing is saying that if you want to simply specify a product that is free of flame retardants and still meeting KL 117, this is one easy way to do it. I will be honest, not all people are getting that credit quite yet, because there's actually a transition period we're going through from our old BIFMA level standard to our new one, which is the 2019 version. But people understand this credit, they kind of understand the language, and therefore I think it's very much worth your while to reach out to them and just talk through this using this, call it chapter and verse. And you can see here it goes beyond flame retardants. One thing that we are doing and we're working, I see some people actually on the Q&A and others are also part of the supply chain. They are also looking at ways to eliminate these items. Next slide. And I think that's it. Please reach out to me if I can help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate it. Our last speaker is Jen Jackson. She leads the Toxics Reduction and Healthy Ecosystem team at San Francisco Department of the Environment. She and her team lead initiatives that reduce the use of toxic chemicals and encourage proper disposal of products that are harmful to humans and the environment. Thank you so much, Jen, for offering your expertise to our group.
Thanks, Judy. Appreciate it. So can you all hear me okay? Sound is okay?
I can hear you.
Great, good. I just want to make sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about San Francisco's journey with regard to flame retardants. If you could go to the next slide. It's been a long journey, I will say, and it all began when we started to hear about all of the concerns with regard to flame retardants. This is back in the days when PBDs were extremely common, but many flame retardants have similar health concerns and environmental concerns. And so we wanted to address them, but it was pretty tough. If you go to the next slide, please. We also knew in San Francisco that our firefighters were at increased risk of many of the health harms that flame retardants pose. And in particular, our San Francisco firefighters were finding they were having increased incidence of breast cancer, and women firefighters have 3 times the rate of breast cancer than your average population. Next slide. Yet we also know we need fire safety. We don't want our couches going up in flames like this one. And so we felt like we were in this catch-22. What do we do? Next slide, please. But we also wondered if this was really a false dilemma. Was there some other way other than TD 117 to have fire safety? And how could we have fire safety without flame retardants? And as we've all heard, that's when the Bureau swooped in. If you go to the next slide, please. This is a statement that was in the final statement of reasons from the Bureau when they issued the TB 117-2013 regulation. And we've heard this already, but I think it's really worth showing it because, again, we know that fire deaths and injuries are predominantly from smoldering materials, so especially smoking materials. And TB 117 addresses that flammability issue. And it's actually more of a real world test, as we've heard. Next slide, please. So when that happened, and then on top of that, additional work done by advocates at the state level, this SB 1019 labeling requirement came into play. It set San Francisco up for being able to do something about getting flame retardants out of furniture. So if we could have a new standard for flammability and have a label showing that something did not have flame retardant chemicals. And finally, we could work with retailers to get them to stop selling furniture that contained flame retardants. And so our first step, really, next slide, please, was to do a campaign. Go back one, please. There you go. We did a voluntary retailer pledge campaign. So we worked with retailers across the city and asked them, would you source flame retardant free furniture that has that X box and the no chemical flame retardants added box? And we had lots and lots of retailers pledge. They were offered these materials in their stores. And then we also did outreach to residents to let them know that this was now available to them. And once we saw that retailers were really eager to take up this pledge and take up the charge of finding flame retardant free furniture and that it was available in the marketplace. Next slide, please. We were then able to pass the first ordinance in the nation that banned flame retardant chemicals in furniture in 2017. So this went into effect in January of 2019. And we worked with all of our retailers across the city, helping educate them, helping them understand that furniture manufacturers also were really delighted to no longer have to put flame retardants in their furniture and that there would be available options for them. Next slide, please. So once we had that in place, maybe sort of along the same timeline, actually, we started working on our own purchasing regulations and specifications for city purchases of furniture. And you may not know it, but cities buy a lot of furniture. So we have airports like SFO, cities have hospitals and large conference centers like we have Moscone Center. So there's lots and lots of places where we buy furniture. And there actually can be a lot of turnover of furniture in places where there's a lot of public use. And so we wanted to make sure that we were towing the line ourselves, and we used our own purchasing as kind of an incubator to make sure that we could do it. And so early on, we started specifying furniture without flame retardants. And then we actually issued our own regulations in 2020, but we have been doing this for quite a while. Our 2020 citywide furniture regulations included no flame retardants, which was already the law of the land by that point, but also no perfluorinated or polyfluorinated chemicals, which are the stain guards, antimicrobials, VOCs, et cetera. So these are all together called the hazardous handful of chemicals, and we don't want them in our furniture at all. They pose many different health harms and also environmental harms. Next slide, please. So I thought I would give you all some tools and resources for how we are doing this ourselves as purchasers. It's not 100% simple, but we do have resources for you. So first of all, we have our own website called sfapproved.org, and this is a screenshot of it. And at the top of it, there's a place where you can plug in furniture, a little search engine, and you'll get a lot of results. But if you go to furniture, upholstered, this is what you will get. And this is our way of helping purchasers in the city to identify furniture that is safer. And so the very first resource is the Center for Environmental Health's Healthier Upholstered Furniture and Fabric Guide. And then we also have Level and Green Screen certified. Go to the next slide, please. This is our regulation. We actually point to these guides in our regulation, so we can help folks if they end up looking here instead of SF approved, they know where to go. And we're happy to share our regulations with you if you would like to borrow from them, copy them, steal them. It's all great. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot of CEH's Healthier Furniture Guide. And if you drill into it, it's a spreadsheet with a whole assortment of furniture that purchasers can use. They can click on different links to identify products that they would like. And it's a pretty good tool. It's not a interactive tool in the way some of the other tools that I'm about to show you are, but it's actually probably I would say right now, the best guide for our purchasers. Next slide, please. The level certification, which you had heard about from Steve, if you go into their website, which is publicly available, you can click on the material chemistry button and you'll find a wide range of furniture there. It's, as Steve mentioned, there's sort of a gap between the 2019 level certification and the current one. And so manufacturers are catching up to it. But if you click on this and you'll find manufacturers that are working toward reducing those chemicals, and then you can actually reach out to the manufacturers and ask them if they are compliant with the 7.4.4 credit. And if so, then they won't have flame retardants, etc. Next slide, please. There's also another certification, Green Screen Certified, which we point to in our regulation. It's a fairly new certification that was put together by Green Screen Certified, which is Clean Production Action Certification Program. And they work with stakeholders. It's a broad-based stakeholder group that puts together this certification. And this certification eliminates flame retardants, PFAS, heavy metals, and a number of other of the hazardous handful. Right now, if you go to this website, there aren't any furniture products currently listed, but as I said, it's a brand new certification. So as folks start to specify it, then manufacturers will work to have their products certified under it. Next slide, please. And then the last resource is Healthcare Without Harm's website. So you can go to this page within their website and see all of the different companies that have pledged to offer products that would not contain flame retardant chemicals and a number of other problematic chemicals of concern. And so you can see that there are really a large number, and this is just A through D. It goes all the way down to Z. So lots and lots of manufacturers are now providing seating and upholstered furniture that does not contain flame retardants. So you could click on any one of these and then contact one of those manufacturers and ask them about what are they doing, and then look specifically at different products that they offer to make sure. You sometimes have to do this marriage of, okay, I found a manufacturer, I like this product. Now I need to ask them, does it actually meet my requirements? And that's where the CEH list also really comes in handy, because it actually screens for that. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to end, and I know we have lots and lots of questions that have popped up in the Q&A, and probably some folks are sitting on their own questions, so I will let us go to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jen. So appreciate your work in San Francisco, such a pioneer. It's wonderful. Thank you. So we are going to launch now our poll again and give you an opportunity to take another crack at those questions, and we'll see if you learn something. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then we'll move to question and answer after that. So we'll just take a moment or two for people to get a chance to respond to this question. Thank you so much for participating. It really helps us know, are we conveying the information in a way that's understandable? Do we need to work harder in the future? So thank you. It's really great. Thank you for participating. It's also great for our funders to be able to say this many people learned, got answers correct. And all of these presentations will be available after the presentation. We'll send it out in just a couple of days, the recording, as well as a link to the slides and a resource sheet. Okay, I think we're doing great. So now if you would reveal the answers, Milena, my helper. So what is the most common ignition source for furniture fires? 92% of you got it correctly, which is the smoldering source. That is the most common form. It's the cigarette kind of fire. So congratulations to those of you who got that. And for those of you who said small open flame, that was the past flammability standard. And the large open flame is like the TB 133, but that's not the most common cause. So this is a good one because it's tricky. And I think we wrote it maybe a little trickily. Technical Bulletin TB 117/2013 prohibits the use of flame retardant chemicals in upholstered furniture products. So the technical bulletin itself does not prohibit the use of flame retardants in upholstered products because remember the bulletin is just a test method. It's not really, can't specify how you meet it. However, California did pass the law banning the use of flame retardant chemicals in furniture, as did many other states now, Maine and Maryland and other states as well. And so I guess you could say it's prohibited in the sense that if it can't be sold in the state of California, that does drive a lot of the market, but the bulletin itself can't specify that it's prohibited to use flame retardants. Excuse me. And the third question, what type of national furniture flammability standard has the US adopted? The good news is yes, almost 3/4 of you got it right. It's the smolder standard, the one with the cigarette, just like TB 117/2013. They chose not to adopt an open flame standard, but we do have one effective this year. So that's the very good news. Thank you so much for sharing those results. And we will stop sharing those. And then we will go to question and answers. We have a lot of questions that were, excuse me, I'm trying to end that. There we go. There are a lot of questions that were provided ahead of time, and we'll try and address those as well as questions that have come up right now. So the first question is, one that came up a number of times is, how do you ensure we're purchasing furniture that is not treated with flame retardants, PFAS, or other chemicals? If our speakers would turn on their video, I'm going to suggest that maybe Jen, you take a good first crack at that, and other people can as well.
Sorry about that. Could you repeat it, Judy? I was having trouble with my video.
I'm so sorry. How do you ensure that we're purchasing furniture that's not treated with flame retardants, PFAS, or other harmful chemicals?
So on flame retardants, a lot of manufacturers have decided to use that consolidated label that you've seen. So if in California, you absolutely should see that consolidated label, and you'll see an X marks the spot if no chemical flame retardants have been used. Some manufacturers are doing that across the country because it's simpler for them just to do one label. So in some places, you may see that as well in other states. Otherwise, you could go to the CEH resource that we will give you. We'll give you a link to that, or to the BIFMA level resource as well, and ask manufacturers if they're complying with their credit 7.4.4. So those two are probably the simpler ways to both get at flame retardants as well as all of the other hazardous chemicals that we've talked about a little bit tonight.
Would anybody else like to add to that? I guess I would add that if you go to the Center for Environmental Health, CEH.org, we have a number of resources available. Thank you, Jen, for mentioning the guide. If you're a designer or a purchaser, we have model technical specifications that you can put into place. We have all kinds of materials. And if you contact me, I'll also be happy to help you on that. Anybody else want to add anything?
I'll add real quickly. I mean, I think just to add on is, you know, the more you can reach out to supply or manufacturers and just make sure they understand their chemistry. I mean, I think it's becoming, especially in the last 10 years, most of the manufacturers that they're trying for one, and because of different regulations, if they haven't investigated their chemistry, that to me is a red flag. Most of them, though, are asking their supply chain now that exact same question, and hopefully it's bubbling up whether things are in there or not.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, 7.4.4 was designed to be the silver bullet, and we're hoping that more and more manufacturers will be making products to meet it. Another question was, how would you advise clients with older furniture containing flame retardants? What should they do? And I'm wondering if somebody from Green Science Policy would like to take a crack at that one.
Sure, Judy. One thing that they can do is you can still keep your furniture, like the wood framing and all of that, and just get the foam replaced with newer foam that does not contain flame retardants. And that's been shown to greatly decrease the amount of flame retardants getting out of that replaced foam furniture into your environment.
Great. There's some questions around chemicals, flame retardants, and what are considered harmful, halogenated versus phosphates versus other kinds. And I'm wondering again if, well, maybe Green Science Policy you'd like to address some of that. Are we considering all flame retardants, hazardous, or is there some other way to be thinking about this?
Sure. So unfortunately, most flame retardants on the market right now have been shown to be toxic. And I think a lot of people were very hopeful that the newer phosphate-based flame retardants were totally fine. And so we saw a huge increase in their use. But recent papers have shown that organophosphate ester flame retardants have the same health harm as the older halogenated flame retardants. And we can share those papers when we share our webinar slides and resources.
Would anybody else like to, Jay, please go ahead. Nope, you're on mute.
One of the points I was trying to make is that in some ways, calling these chemicals flame retardants was brilliant, because we all just assume, as I did for many years, that they retard flame and reduce fire risk. But if we had called them smoke accelerators, which is what they are also, who would put them in furniture? So I'm trying to reverse the paradigm. I don't want to assume there's a fire benefit and then we have to play whack-a-mole with different chemicals to prove that they're unsafe. I think it should be reversed. Until they have proved, using the proper performance criteria, not the ones that they select, that these products will improve fire safety and save lives, which they haven't yet. They've had billions of dollars and 40 years to do it, and they have not yet. So strong evidence to me that they probably can't. And until they can show that, then we shouldn't even consider some new chemical. It just takes too long for the EPA to get decades of evidence. Basically, we're being used like guinea pigs. And then when they finally outlaw it, they go to another chemical. So I would, instead of saying, are there some safe flame retardants? Because they can always come up with a new one that hasn't been designated toxic by the EPA yet, which they consider to be safe. I would say, let's make them prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is a potential fire safety benefit before we even consider whether or not the chemical they're using to achieve that is safe or not.
Thank you, Jay. Anybody else want to chime in on that one? I'll put a plug in for Green Science Policy's 6classes.org website. They take a class-based approach, and just like what everybody's been saying, Jay and Lydia, we will never know all about every single flame retardant that's going to come on the market, but they have enough structural similarities and functions that we can pretty much guess that down the road we will find some difficulties. So if you take the class-based approach and just say no flame retardant chemicals are needed, and so we don't need to put any in our furniture, it really helps with that. And Jay, you can go ahead and lower your hand on that marker. This is a question for Jay. Can you clarify how the smoke from flame retardant furniture impacts the survivability of fires. You're on mute still, I'm sorry.
In a house fire, there's been several studies that show this, and you can look one up. It's called the NIST Home Smoke Alarm Report, but other people have done this as well. The first criteria to be reached in terms of tenability in a house fire is always the smoke. So even in a flaming fire, whether it's a flaming fire, particularly in a smoldering fire, because you could be overcome before it even transitions to the flaming mode. But even in a flaming fire, the first criteria that occurs in a house fire is the smoke. That is, you have to be able to get out of the house before the smoke stops you from moving, because if you stop moving, then eventually you'll be overcome by the toxic products. Very few people actually die from flames. It's always the smoke inhalation. But the first criteria is the smoke that stops you from moving, which often is based on eye irritation. So that's why just because a chemical increases the time to flash over, if it at the same time increases the production of smoke, and smoke that is often more irritating than other smoke, then you might actually get trapped quicker. So, and I have testified to this while the experts from the other side were sitting next to me. And I said, the studies seem to show that what flame retardants achieve is that you might get trapped a little bit quicker, even though you'll survive a little bit longer wherever you are hiding in the house, which means you just suffer longer. That's what their data shows. That's why they want to emphasize that it delays the time to flash over and ignore the potential for smoke increase, which actually is the key first parameter that traps you in a fire.
Great. Anybody else want to contribute to that? Okay, I guess there's a number of very specific questions. Let's see, one more general one. Are other uses of flame retardants still effective, even if they're not useful in furniture? Would somebody like to take that one?
Yeah, I'll try.
Go ahead.
There are specific uses where they may be, like if you are in a situation where you're incapable of exiting, like in a jail, maybe it's useful there. Definitely possibly for wiring, fire alarm wiring in a high rise. You don't want it to burn so that you can't tell people how to evacuate it to defend in place. Space shuttles. Where I don't think there's a use and where there's a massive use is in vehicular seats or baby seats. Because almost every fire, I've been to hundreds and hundreds of car fires, and almost always they start in the engine and spread into then the passenger area. Well, think about it. If you're sitting as a passenger in a car and the fire is spreading from the engine, it's literally going to have to burn through you to reach the seat. So does the flammability of the seat really matter? In addition to which, the car is probably going to fill up with smoke and kill you by the smoke before the flame actually reaches the seat. So that's another huge area outside of furnishings where it's used. And I'm not convinced that there's a lot of merit. These regulations were put in the 70s when they had no idea about the hazards of the chemicals, and they were just trying to throw dots against the dartboard to see something that might help the situation. So there may be specific situations where flame retardants have a use, but typically the exposure to the occupants or firefighters is low.
Great. Anybody else want to add to that? Great. There's a number of questions around some confusion around how you pass the smolder test. And Tonya, this might be a good one for you, and about whether you need flame retardants to pass it or whether they would even be helpful in that kind of a thing. And what we do then recommend, what is effective at preventing for people to pass a smolder test.
Okay, thank you. No, it was tested. You do not need FR chemicals of any form to pass TB 117/2013. Certainly, if you have products that aren't passing, you can provide a barrier material in between the foam and the cover fabric that can be used, and barrier materials have been effective in making it a compliant product.
Great, and this leads into another question, Tonya, that I think you can answer also. There's some concern around whether fabrics that are natural, like not synthetics, can pass TB 117/2013.
Yeah, again, so cottons are more flammable than a synthetic product. And those can be met again by doing a barrier material that encases the foam. And all of that information and questions around that are in our FAQs. And so that will be provided there. So it'll answer all of those types of questions as well.
Great. We are at time, actually just a minute or two over. Apologies. I know there's a lot more questions. If people are interested in staying on the phone for a few more minutes, maybe about 5 more minutes, we can answer a few more questions. And for those of you that have to pop off, I just really want to thank you all for attending. We hope that you will start specifying healthier furniture without flame retardants and without the other chemicals of concern. And again, please reach out to any of the speakers for questions you may have. So I will go ahead, if it's okay, and ask a few more questions. Thank you so much for all of them. There's questions about how you track AB 2998, whether it is tracked and whether it's monitored.
I'll take that one.
Yes, it goes to you.
So really, we look at it from a compliance perspective, where when we'll go out and take samples out in the field here in California, and we'll test those. But we are under contract with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. So it's another governmental agency here, and they actually do the testing for FR chemicals. We do not do the testing here at the Bureau. And then if there is found to be products not compliant, we notify the manufacturer and work with them on gaining compliance.
Great. There's been one other question around the types of fabrics that will typically pass the smolder test. And I'll just throw in that my understanding, and Tonya, please, everybody else, please chime in, is that fabrics with denser weaves tend to do well. And there are synthetic fabrics that do well with that. But Steve, I know you have a lot of experience as a manufacturer as well, and others, so please chime in. No takers on that one?
Well,
All right.
I would just say that a lot of the furniture coverings already easily meet the smolder standard. So, you know, your couch with a polyester covering will easily meet the standard, decrease the risk for a furniture fire without the use of flame retardants.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Really, furniture fabrics can pass mostly. Yes. Steve, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, even foam, I mean, the manufacturers have done a lot to re-engineer foam from a density perspective. So a lot of it really ends up being a kind of an engineering aspect where density will help things in terms of keep it a little bit less easy to essentially get oxygen and then therefore flame or smolder. So all your manufacturers have gone through that process. And I say manufacturers, a lot of times it's the suppliers. It really is more of the suppliers supplying it to them. So that's where, that's again, where the smolder test was so helpful. It's really hard to engineer anything to just withstand open flame for extended periods of time for obvious reasons. So that's where, yeah, people have gone.
Yeah, and there's a question speaking to Lydia's point, is California TB 117-2013 more stringent than NFPA 260? And either Lydia or Tonya, whoever would like to address that.
Do you want to go for it, Tonya? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I hadn't looked at the NFPA standard in a while. Sorry, I've only been back about 8 weeks, so I don't want to make an assumption on that.
Totally fine. Yes, that's not very long. Lydia, I know you guys have looked at that, and my understanding is they're very, very similar. Well, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, and I think with the TB 117-2013 being nationally adopted across the United States, that's plenty sufficient to protect against fires.
Great. There are a number of other questions, but I think at this point, I just want to thank everybody for being on. We so appreciate your attendance. And again, all of our speakers have welcomed you to contact them. We will send you their contact information, and have a great day. And thank you again. And thank you to our wonderful speakers. We couldn't do this without you.